The Syncretion of Polarization and Extremes, Part 29. Uruguay. Difficult to Understand. Transposing Emblem by Lilian Julber. Even though the Church has been separated from the state since the first decade of the 20th century, the Church's negative view of homosexuality made it seem non existent in Uruguay for many, many years. Maybe it wasn't, but obvious examples were few and far between and ignored by both the people and legislation. They hid and were hidden. Sure, there were many people, mostly men, who were thought to be gay or were whispered about, but there was no proof, and a vast majority of them were married to women and had children, so they would pass for heterosexual. While they actively hid their nature, parents also did this with children. When there was an unmarried young gay man in a family, other members tried to hide it, and if it was a young woman, she was simply considered a spinster. No questions were asked about relationships when it came to inheritance and the like as people passed away. In the late 20th century, we saw a little more flexibility, especially in terms of accepting gay males and in legislation, for example, with the recognition of civil unions. But it was not until a few years ago that gay marriages were allowed by law, and some famous people decided to come out of the closet and get married. At this time, a very strong feminist movement also started to become active and defend the rights of discriminated groups in general. So far, so good. There were opinions on both sides, but nothing too extreme. However, a couple of years ago, rights and protection were extended to transsexuality with laws passed to allow them to undergo operations paid for by the government in order to change the biological sex they had been assigned since birth, and these decisions made many people complain, arguing that the government often denies access to costly medicine or treatment for possible terminal illness by saying there is not enough money. The critics asked whether those very same resources should be used for something they did not consider to be a priority. Furthermore, transsexuals were sort of rewarded with a list of benefits that included a special pension for those who were old as repayment for former suffering, free theater tickets to the most prestigious theater in the capital, employment quotas that were added to the already existing ones for handicapped people and other minorities. In addition to this, a manual was developed for sexual education in schools run by the government and also private accredited schools, beginning with kids at the age of 3. And in this manual, it was affirmed that sex is not a biological but a social creation, and it included a section with practical exercises where kids, as I have mentioned, starting at the age of 3, were supposed to lay on mats on the floor and caress each other all around their bodies, including their private parts, which many parents read simply as group masturbation. All these changes have taken place in the course of a couple of years, and it has been confusing. In fact, pandemonium ensued. To many, it seemed that all these measures and laws had turned their lives upside down. That if you were not gay, transsexual, handicapped, or a feminist, if you were a simple heterosexual male or female, you had become abnormal. There have been articles in the newspapers defending one position or the other, mostly depending on the political orientation of the media. But since social media networks have become the arena where most people vent their opinions, sometimes nicely, sometimes with jokes, but often violently, these topics have become the subject of very heated arguments, swearing and insulting, with all kinds of eternal threads. One wonders, how can a balance be found? It is obvious that all minorities should be respected, but to a certain point, what is happening here seems to go beyond respect, becoming almost an extreme, practically an exaggeration. And measures which should have promoted better understanding and tolerance between individuals and collective groups are apparently achieving the exact opposite result. Why is this happening? Has there always been hatred and discrimination among our population? Have these measures been taken in a manner which is too abrupt, too imposing, not considering our people's attitudes and beliefs? How long will it take for the waters to calm down? What will be required? Why do so many people feel their rights are not being considered at the moment when the rights of such minorities are? Or is it not the fact that they are being considered, but the way in which they are being considered? Another point to be highlighted is employment quotas. Even if competitive applications are fair in a country with unemployment running above 8%, after quotas are met for handicapped people, racial diversity, and now sexual diversity, others cannot be sure they will get a job regardless of how high they score on application tests, since positions for minorities are designated before scoring any tests, and that makes people angry. Here we see the complicated tension between meritocracy and equality. The big question is, can you change people's mind and prejudices by simply imposing laws and trying to force ideas on them? Or should there be educational campaigns where these matters become part of a comprehensive workshop where people of all walks of life jointly collaborate in activities that do not specifically relate to their sexual identity but can help them understand that these others working by their side are similar to them, have the same good intentions and feelings, and that people are not defined by their sexual orientation but by their emotions, education, and goals in life? Our country will have to find a good answer to this question and others that have arisen and or will arise in the future to avoid extreme polarization in this matter, which often is the cause of violence.